Scott said shit on the golf course the other day, sort of quietly said shit. Now you feel better, Bob?
Things come out of my mouth when they are in the appropriate setting.
Hearing your story, it's like, now I get why you're such a good boy.
I have made some agreements with my higher power in order for me to be where I stay. And I go to treatment to appease the courts. That was my first treatment experience. I chased a girl around treatment for 30 days. At the same time, I'm playing Captain Recovery.
The romance thing, like we all have this, like, I'm not good enough. Drugs make me feel like I'm good enough. Take it away and maybe I can find someone just as sick as me.
It's something about a Band-Aid. If I just fix what's going on with me today, I'm just putting Band-Aids on a gaping wound that's under the surface. I have to get in there and dig the infection out. Okay, but at the time, again, I wasn't ready to quit. I just didn't want to go to jail.
Hi there, and welcome to the Recovery Crew here at Deep Waters. I'm Dr. Bob Beare, and our guest on this show is Scott Smith. Scott is a dude with great recovery. He also understands the treatment industry and how to do really quality, ethical work in that realm. He's also a pretty spiritual dude that I think you'll enjoy this conversation. So we're glad you're here at the Recovery Crew at Deep Waters, and we do a lot of workshops that are about helping people heal from trauma and find that giant, vibrating, blissful part of themselves that we're all kind of looking for, right? Let's enjoy this life. It's fairly short, they tell me. So glad you're here. You're in the Deep Waters now. Okay, here we are once again at the Recovery Crew here at Deep Waters Recovery, and we have Scott Smith as our guest today. Anybody that knows him is already just they probably took a deep breath knowing that they're going to get a juicy story, but you're also going to get hopefully, because Scott is truly a humble dude. Hopefully he'll also talk about the way that he's bringing the message to the world in such a dynamic way. Our co-host today is Camille Reid, who also has spectacular recovery, although she would never say that because she also has a vein of humility. But she's also our programs coordinator here at Deep Waters Recovery. And actually, I'm going to start things off. Camille, if you wouldn't mind just briefly letting folks know what's happening here at Deep Waters, and then I'll introduce Scott further and let him launch on his story for today. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Deep Waters Recovery is an advanced healing experience for men and women. The Deep Waters Intensive, or the DWI, is a 3-day transformational trauma resolution experience that uses psychodrama, bioenergetics, and rituals of empowerment. We've got our next facilitators training, which is going to be June 4th and 5th, and that's an opportunity for anyone who works with others to do their own inner work and learn action tools to use in groups. If you'd like to bring the sustainable trauma resolution into the curriculum of your treatment facility, please reach out to us to get more information. And Deep Waters also has an outpatient program where individuals can work with Dr. Beare and his colleagues in groups, individual, couples, and family sessions. If you'd like to reach out to us, our email is admin, ADMIN, at deepwatersrecovery.com, or our phone number is 512-677-7847, or go on to deepwatersrecovery.com and send us a message. The weekly blogs come out on Mondays, and then we follow up with the podcast on Fridays, which is on all podcast platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all the social media channels. You can like, follow, subscribe. And also we have Bob's TikTok channel where he is the recovery and trauma guy. Wise ass therapy solutions.
Yep. Look at Scott. He's never even seen TikTok. He's too old for that. Look at me. I'm young and vibrant.
I have an 8-year-old, so I do know what TikTok is.
Okay.
There you go.
My 18-year-old is almost aged out of it, but she kind of set me up and showed me how to pull it off. And now I'm having a blast with it. You can make these videos with background music that It's a blast. All right. So we have Scott Smith, who is the CEO of Extra Mile Recovery. At the end of this, he's going to talk a little bit more about what that program is. Brightside Sober Living is the outfit that I've had the most to do with. I know there's a bunch of houses, like 7 or 8 houses in Central Austin for men doing the real deal version of recovery. If anybody wants to know what that is, listen carefully to Scott's story today. He is working what I consider to be the real deal style of recovery. There's many versions of this thing. And Ascension House is one of the other ventures that has grown out of Scott's bringing the message to the world. That's a therapeutic style. This is the way I say it, sort of a therapeutic style sober living for men and women. Although Scott wouldn't use the word therapeutic because he's trying to be careful and not put off a bunch of therapists. But I know what folks are doing there, and they're doing healing together, community healing together. And so that's just a little bit of what Scott's up to in the world. Today we have him here just to tell his story, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And we're going to interrupt you sometimes and poke around and maybe share some of our experience. But so glad you're here, Scott. It's all yours, brother.
All right. Thank you for having me. So I think I just would like to start off by saying that, it really doesn't matter where you came from. It really doesn't matter where we started. What matters is, where we ended up and what are we going to do about it. And, I say that because I came from a family that was not abnormal in pretty much any way. When I grew up, I was a kid in the 70s and 80s. My family went to church regularly. My parents were together my whole childhood until well after I had graduated high school. There was no fighting or physical abuse or anything like that in my household. My dad made a great income, and I didn't really want for anything. I went to private schools my whole life.
You have what we call the good family syndrome.
Good family is exactly what it was. And, I was not an unpopular kid. I was a pretty normal kid. I, kind of mingled with every group when there became groups. When you're little kids, everybody's just a kid or whatever. But I was a mischievous kid. I was an adventurous kid, and I remember I started to do things that got me in a little bit of trouble. Somewhere around kindergarten is my first memories of doing risky type stuff. Elementary school, I got in a few fights, and I would do weird. I brought a bullet to school one time, just to have in my pocket, just kind of weird, little mischievous things. Was in the principal's office a few times. Would sneak off, randomly from recess or things like that. So, like, I started misbehaving. I was kind of I was a small kid. I was a middle child. I really looked for ways to stand out, I think, to try to be noticed. My dad was a hard worker. My dad worked 80 hours a week. He was a CPA and was really climbing the ladder in the firm that he worked in, and he was traveling a lot. And so, my mom pretty much was the disciplinarian and all that stuff. And my dad was not around a whole lot, to my memory. I really can't say pinpoint anything that was bad in my life. When I got to junior high,
what
go ahead.
are you there, Scott? Can you hear me? Yeah, it's just like, damn, I can't blame it on my family. That's the
Yeah.
that's just a little preview for the rest of. I know some of Scott's story. Damn, he can't blame it on his family.
I can't blame it on my family. And I'm glad you said that, because I think that later on I began to blame myself for things, and I really couldn't. I'd never looked at my parents and said, you don't treat me right, or da 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 da. But I did notice, like, I felt like I didn't get as much attention as maybe my baby sister did, or
that's right.
In school, I didn't get as much attention as some of the bigger boys did, or the athletes did, or whatever. And I was athletic, but I just wasn't big enough to play to be great.
You're pointing at a really important thing that we emphasize at Deep Waters and at the Braveheart Experience and at the Deep Waters Intensives, which are all recovery oriented, but mostly about healing trauma so to prevent relapse, right?
Yes.
And that concept that you just put out there, once we blame people, our parents or anybody else, or even ourselves, our recovery stops. It's absolutely useless to blame anybody, but we do have to look. I waited for my dad to come home for quite a few hours, many nights. And it's not that my dad was bad. He was taking care of himself to not come home. That's a whole nother story. But I'm left. I need to work on those issues. And it's not about blaming anybody, but I had some abandonment. It's not about them anymore. My dad's gone. I think your dad's still around somewhere over in.
My dad's still around, and we're very close today. And what I would tell you is, like, trauma can be real or perceived. It still affects me the same way.
That is exactly
and that's one of the things that I have learned and accepted and been able to utilize in my step work, is being able to look back. And the truth is, I'm not even sure how much my dad was. This is just me as a grown person now looking back. My dad worked a lot, but then my dad coached my little league soccer teams and stuff, and we did go on vacations. But like, because I am who I am, because I have this disease called alcoholism, is I start twisting some of that stuff up, and I forget that I'm having good times, and I start focusing on like these negative cognitions, right? I start, like, these negative things are starting to fester in me and start touching other things in my life. And what happened with me is I started believing somewhere along the way, and I can't really pinpoint it, that I wasn't good enough, big enough, strong enough. I wasn't enough. One of the things that I look back on, and my dad and I kind of laugh about it today, because we still struggle to say I love you to each other. It's kind of awkward. We don't do it very often, but we do it today, and we mean it, but it's still kind of weird,
The Wi-Fi just went kind of weird, that you probably didn't notice it. Camille, did you see that? It was like awkward.
Well,
yeah,
perfect. Maybe God wanted me to emphasize that. I don't know.
It's perfect.
Yeah, that was perfect timing.
So my dad grew up in a household where the entire family picked cotton. Men didn't really, there wasn't a lot of I love yous going on, right? It was in rural Alabama. So there wasn't a whole lot of I love yous going on from man to man in my house, right? My dad would tell my sister he loved her, and she's a little baby girl and all that stuff, but man to man, where it just isn't how he showed love. He showed love in a whole bunch of other ways, but I know today that may be a piece in what affected me. I never got the affirmation in the way, I don't know if I've read the 5 love languages and all that stuff, but there's those things where he's given affirmations in a language he speaks, and I may not be receiving them from that language. and my language is not being fed. And I love that book. And if you haven't read it, you should go out and read it. Like, that thing really enlightened me on some stuff. But, you know, so I'm not getting these affirmations from different places. And as I get older and as I get into puberty and I'm starting to be attracted to girls and all that kind of stuff is starting to happen, I'm still this little kid and I don't feel good enough. And I had told you guys before that I recently had read my yearbooks, and every yearbook is filled with girls signing my yearbook telling me what a sweet small kid I am, right? And all that stuff. And it's really like, I was like, and I didn't even remember that, but when I read it, I was like, wow, you know, like I teach in the 12-step work. When I'm teaching and talking about the spiritual malady, I teach about the tentacles. And, you know, my clinical director focuses on the trauma piece and talking about how the nervous system and the brain and all that stuff interacts, and memory networks work. And I talk about that from a spiritual side, but how it festers and how it grows like a virus, and how one little seed of that will start festering into everything. And my life got festered with this impression that I wasn't good enough or I wasn't worthy. And what it started to do was it started to affect how I felt about myself, and therefore sabotaging relationships as I get older. And I'm either not able to enter one, or when I do enter one, I screw it up because I'm either becoming clingy, or I'm becoming standoffish, or I'm becoming an asshole, whatever, you know.
Yeah, that's like Scott. That's the thing that we talk a lot about at these intensives. The way that even a subtle, like for you and me, we're from these great families. All of my friends came over. Mama and Papa Bear were the best. You know, it was hard for me to see that I had any trauma, right? But there was a lot going on underneath the surface there, and it took me a while to own it. But it wasn't any like really intrusive, violent thing. But little seeds, like you just said, took me off of my trajectory to try to compensate. And I'm sure at your treatment center, you probably have the family mobile with the different roles that we all play in dysfunctional families, which we're all from, by the way. Show me somebody that has the perfect family. So we get off our trajectory, even just a tiny bit when we're little, right? And then by the time we're a little older, we're further off the trajectory. And then we do what your clinical director would refer to probably as we collect complex trauma. And then we've got this big bag of, because we put ourselves in positions where more bad shit happens, right? We're about to get that story from Scott, because I happen to know some of his story. Some bad shit is about to happen, Camille. I'm just letting you know. So we start stacking this trauma on top of trauma, and we wonder why our life is a mess, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So just, you know, to kind of move forward a little bit in my story, like I dabbled with, you know, substances in high school. I was typical teenage. We'd smoke pot, and we'd occasionally might get a 40 and drink a 40, but I never like had anything that I was just had to have. I never, you know, I didn't skip school. I graduated high school. I did well. I came home at curfew most of the time, you know, things like that. So, you know, I went through high school with no real indication that I was going to have a problem with substances, no real consequences. I had a dad that fixed everything. I had told y'all that before, you know, that my dad was kind of the fixer and classic enabler.
Did he march into school and bail you out of situations like my mom did for me?
Yeah, he was definitely and more than school. He marched into court and get me out of it. Like my first accident, you know, I got I don't know, it's out of state single car accident, whatever. And they you know, he went and got that thrown out, and you know, and I would just watch my dad just like you know, stuff come out of his mouth, and people would just be like, okay, and he'd fix it, or if I broke something, he would pay to get it fixed, and it would fix and it fixed. So that was my experience through high school. I never really experienced any consequences. I went to college my first year, got to live in the dorms. I got my first experience of freedom, and I basically I pledged a fraternity, and I started to party all night, sleep all day, and that was my college experience. Still no serious consequences of that other than failing grades, and kind of like Bill Wilson, and he's taking his exams and all that and decides that it's not for him. That's, in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm just not ready for school. I didn't, it wasn't about drinking every night. It was about, school's not for me. I'm just not ready for school. So that's when I decided to join the military. And to which I decided to get married to a woman that I barely knew. I had met her a couple of weeks before I joined the military, and married her a couple of weeks before I went into basic training.
We teach that at Deep Waters a lot. That's how to create a really a relationship with much potential.
Yeah. Honestly, at this point, my picker is all messed up, right? Because my spirituality is so ingrained in me that I'm just picking based on the idea that I'm scared to be by myself. And if this person's paying attention to me, I better grab it because I may not get another chance. That's literally how myself would speak to me.
Yeah.
Wow. So, obviously I'm not picking based on any type of principles. So of course, we get pregnant immediately before I go to basic training. And while I'm at basic training, she's proceeded to move on and sleep with a buddy of mine. And then that marriage basically looked like that for 4 years, like sleeping with every friend that I make. Is just, again, reinforcing the spirituality. Like my spirituality is constantly telling me I must be unlovable. I must be a bad person. I must be doing something wrong. How can this possibly? Right. I need to fix this. I constantly am trying to repair something that I didn't.
Scott, the spiritual malady. Now that you've mentioned it 8 times, for anybody that's listening, it may not quite. I mean, it's like casual reference to you that you didn't know what that was before you got.
No, I mean, obviously, I did not.
Essentially, I'll just say, in my mind, the way that you're framing it today has to do with our trauma sometimes affects the way we see the world, or the way we think. We don't know if it's a friendly universe or what it is. We make up the way the universe is based on the shit that we carry forward, right? And I think when you're saying spiritual malady, you're pointing somewhere in that direction, aren't you?
I would tell you that anytime I say spiritual malady, you can put trauma in there, and it is completely interchangeable in my mind.
Okay.
Whether it's real or perceived, and I said that earlier, trauma is what goes on inside of me based on the events. The events can be real or perceived events, but it causes me to change in here, and I get wired wrong. And once I'm wired wrong, it starts messing up everything as I go along, and it really just snowballs from there. And that's kind of how, when I say spiritual malady, like I said earlier, my clinical director will stand right next to me and show you how that works in trauma and on the scientific side of things. So, which is why I love, honestly, the program that we run today, is because we're very good about interfacing those two so that people can understand it both from a spiritual and from a therapeutic, viewpoint. I think it's important to be able to reach people on both and not just teach them one side or the other. I think when they understand how this thing is all working together, it makes it a little easier for me to proceed with it. So, honestly, what happened in there is I spent 4 years in the military. I stayed connected to a bad relationship that I shouldn't have been in. And I convinced myself, because we had a child and because I came from this Christian background, and you're supposed to only get married once, that I was supposed to make sure that this worked out, and I would do everything, blah, blah, blah. And when I got out of the military, finished my 4-year deal, I go back to my home, and I'm around my family who makes me feel secure again. And then I have the guts to walk away from the relationship because now I'm around people that I feel like will take care of me again. Once that happened, my sister was like, hey, let's start going, come out with us. We got a great group of friends. And I started doing that. And so I go to the bars, and this is where I found my disease for the first time. And I'm going out and I'm starting to meet some people and things like that. And one night, it's close to closing time, and we've had a few drinks, and I'm a little sketchy on driving home, and somebody says, hey, I got something that'll straighten you out. If you want something before you drive home. I said, sure, why not? And they gave me a little bump of methamphetamine, and when I put it into my body, I instantly felt a relief that I'd never known that I needed to feel. Honestly, I felt my shoulders drop. I felt whole, and I felt good, and I'd never felt that good in my whole life. And I will say this: I didn't know I felt bad, honestly, until I felt better. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
that's good.
Like, I wasn't running around life being like, I want to kill myself. I'm miserable. Like, I wasn't that person.
Yeah.
Like, I was just bouncing around like a ping pong ball in life. And it was whatever happened. And I thought I was just a normal guy. I thought this was normal stuff that happened to people, being in bad marriages and I had not at this point pieced anything together in my life that had led me to this point.
It's like beating ourselves on the head with a hammer and stopping. It's like,
yeah. I mean, I realized that I felt more. I don't know how to say it. Like, I just felt complete.
Yeah.
I never was a casual user from that moment forward. I stayed connected to that person, to that drug, consistently for the next 10 years, minus a few, arrests and little minor things like that.
That's one of the misnomers that maybe folks that aren't on this topic as much as you and I are, and Camille, is that all that drug use was bad. That was bad. You're bad. It's like, are you kidding me? It got me here. I had no clue of any other medications or any other interventions or anything else, and until I found it, it got me here. Who knows what if I would have checked out a long time ago.
Yeah, and to your point, Bob, like talking about drugs are bad and people, drug addicts are bad people. I was a normal, like, I never had you talked about some of the juicy parts of my story. That didn't come for me until later.
Yeah, but it's in your eye. Can you see it, Camille? I could see it. It's just sort of in his eye. Sort of a wise guy, troublemaker. It's just on you. Sorry.
It's but I think it's important for people that don't have, maybe that are searching, trying to understand why their loved one went down this path, or just trying to understand this thing. It's in politics now. It's all over. There's a lot out there, and drug addicts are not bad people. Drug addicts are sick people that have found a way to self-medicate that got a hold of them, and they weren't able to shake it off. And we're trying to find a way to express how I got out from under it, and how I was able to shake it off, and how I keep it shaken off. And what basically happened to me is, from that point forward, I went through a very brief period of successes while I was using drugs. Like, methamphetamines made me a better salesperson, and it made me, my business was killing it, and I was doing all these things, and for a minute, like, I was the life of the party, and I had money in my pockets, and and I was doing all these things until it wasn't. And it just kind of slowly rolled into taken away from my time at those things and me having to spend more time securing the thing that made me feel better and going after that. And it's costing more money because it's not working as effectively as it was. And I'm not staying on that part of my game as long as I was. So I'm having to feed that. And that's where this physical, part of my addiction comes in, where my body is starting to change and it's starting to chemically alter and it's starting to biologically need to be fed.
That Band-Aid, it's a very strong Band-Aid, methamphetamines, and it covered up the wound for a while, right?
It did.
Cocaine and alcohol and sex and love were a great Band-Aid for me until it wasn't anymore, right? And then there's and then that trauma that we so carefully crammed down under that Band-Aid usually finds its way to the surface when we slam into some either legal or loss of someone important in our lives. When we hit that wall, the Band-Aid comes off, hopefully long enough for us to get some help.
Well, I mean, for me, what I will say with meth, with me, I mean, it's not like you find meth in the most out in the open, clean social environment. So, immediately I'm starting to go to kind of rougher and rougher environments to secure what I need. And because I like to fit in the things, I start adapting to that lifestyle and that character of becoming this rough and tumble. I can use a little bit of my military experience, and I become like the image that I think I need to have to be protected in that environment. And so I start playing that part, and before long, and I get to a place where I'm no longer playing the part. Now I'm having to do certain things to feed my disease.
Yeah.
I lost my business. Long story short, I basically, sold half of my stock just to stay high and things like that. And, got married again to a woman that was in the strip club, stripper and in the strip clubs. And, I was emerged in that environment. Bikers, I got really deep. And, I think I had told y'all I ended up basically, that marriage lasted a year, in and out, bam, bam, like it was over. I was just too far gone to sustain anything. And, I had abandoned my kid, my son, years back at this point. He was 4 when I basically separated from him. By this time I'm, running up on him being 7, 8, 9 years old, and I'm falling apart. So finally I get arrested for the first time. And I'm selling drugs for a group of bikers. And, I get arrested, pretty much immediately. They come in and want me to set up a sting operation, want me to, bring an undercover in and all that stuff. And I just, my dad, of course, gets me the best attorney out there. And it gets fixed so that I don't have to do that. I get shipped off to Texas to Starlight Recovery. I'm told, we're going to set the court date out for about a year. We need you to get down there. We want you to do really good. We're going to do like a probation, call in probation, da, 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 da. So they just ship me off and say, don't come back. Right. So that's what I do. And I go to treatment to appease the courts. That was my first treatment experience. Starlight was a wonderful place. I did really well in Starlight. Sorry, Starlight, but I chased a girl around, treatment for 30 days. At the same time, I'm playing Captain Recovery and all that stuff. And I'm involved. I'm really gravitating towards, at the time, the director there was Kurt Koreska, and he was like really a dynamic guy. And I was like, wow, he had Kirk's Power Hour, and I would just light up at Kirk's Power Hour, and he would, be so animated, and I would get into that. And I did a treatment fifth step with Kirk, because he's the director and he's a big shot. So it made me feel like a big shot. But it was just all like surface shit. I remember my first treatment experience, and when they told me I needed to put my resentments on paper, like I was that guy that's like, I really don't have resentments.
Yeah.
Like, I really don't. I don't really
mad.
think about that stuff.
I'm not mad at anybody.
No.
Hey, just a minute. I want to interrupt just for a second, Scott, before there's so much juicy stuff here already. I just want to get Camille in the conversation. I'll give you 3 prompts and just see if anything resonates. Being from a good family, getting bailed out of everything, and romance and treatment.
Yeah, I mean, all 3 of them. Mostly like the getting bailed out of things, but I feel like a lot of everything that you're saying in your story, and coming from whenever you first put the amphetamines in your body and you didn't realize you had a problem, and then you're like, oh, this is what I need, and then you keep doing it. I feel like most like people that have substance use issues, like we don't realize that we're doing whatever we know how to do with like the tools that we have, until somebody intervenes and gives us like the new toolkit, right? Like we're just doing what we can, and then somebody else is going to come in and say like, okay, try it this way, and then same thing with like the romance thing. Like we all have this, like, I'm not good enough. The drugs make me feel like I'm good enough. Like most people that are doing like amphetamines or cocaine or anything, it's like, now I'm good enough. I have like this warm little blanket around me. Take it away and maybe I can find someone just as sick as me.
That's right.
Take the drugs away and let me find someone who's equally as sick, if not worse, to like give me a little bit of attention.
Isn't that part of your actual story? You told that in your podcast, I think, about a time in treatment when that game was going on, right?
Yeah, multiple times, all the time.
Yeah.
Every time.
That's why she's not telling the story, because it's 10 stories. All right.
Well, we are so, I mean, and everybody's spirituality is different, when they come in, how they got broken, or where I did not feel like I was broken. I felt like I was in trouble and I had to do certain things to get out of trouble, but I didn't feel broken at the time. That's because
that's the orientation of, it's out there. My problem is out there.
Yeah.
Right. Versus in here. I love the statements. I don't have any resentments. I interrupted you right there.
Yeah. I mean, I just didn't feel like, I held a grudge. And one thing I want to say to that, and y'all can hurry me along whenever you want to, but one thing I want to say to that is that, I had a misunderstanding that a resentment, and I see this a lot today. And I just want to say that a resentment is not, am I currently upset over something? Do I feel angry or aggravated over something? It is to refeel something. That's basically what a resentment is. And it's and so I really like to point out to like my sponsees and the people that I teach the 12-step work to, like, have you ever? Yeah. And if you can say, I have ever been disappointed, been embarrassed, been ashamed, felt abandoned, any of those things, that needs to go down in my resentment list. Because really what I didn't understand at the time is I'm looking for why I feel why I am the way I am, right? And I can't just do that from what's going on with me today. Like Bob said something about a Band-Aid. If I just fix what's going on with me today, I'm just putting Band-Aids on a gaping wound that's under the surface. I have to get in there and dig the infection out. So I understand that significantly today, but at the time, again, I wasn't ready to quit. I just didn't want to go to jail. So I wasn't really buying in. I'll do what you say to do, and I want to look good, so I'll do it really well. But when I get out of here, I'm kind of done with this. And that's kind of what happened was when I left, I went to Austin, Texas, because the girl was from Austin, Texas. I went to Sober Living, but I didn't go to meetings. I wasn't, required to do anything like that in this little probation I was doing. I just stayed in Sober Living and went to work, and I became a tattoo artist. Like that was my I didn't want a real job, so I became a tattoo artist, and I'm working down on 6th Street, staying clean and doing all that stuff, going back to the sober house. But that was as far as it went. What happened for me was, after 8 months of sobriety, of, not using, 8 months of that, I was approached by my boss one night that said, man, you did a great job tonight. Let me buy you a couple of beers. And I wanted to impress the boss, who is also a big biker. Right. And I have the thing for I want to be like bikers being, impressed with me makes me feel better, or whatever. So I want to please him. So I'm like, yeah, man, let's go do that. And successfully managed to do that, successfully hit it from the sober house, and briefly was able to do that before I decided in my head, man, I'm so successful now, I should just open my own tattoo shop. And, again, this grandiosity of us addicts is I literally only learned how to tattoo 8 months ago, and all of a sudden I'm so professional that I opened my own tattoo shop in downtown Austin. So that happened, and I opened it next door to a strip club, and this is where the pieces are starting to happen. And I wasn't plotting, hey, I want to start using meth again. But if I look back, I'm putting the pieces of the puzzle in place so that it will be easier for me to get back there. Right. Mm-hmm. I've now connected with a biker. I've now put my new tattoo shop where I'm my own boss and nobody can catch me doing anything wrong. It's a cash business next door to a strip club. And my customers are going to be late night people that are always messed up.
This is that thing that we say, relapse does not start with the use of the drug, right?
Correct.
You set up the life around you.
Correct. And honestly, in the 12-step world, we don't even really, I can't really call it a relapse because I never worked steps in the first place. So really, I just was on pause, right? Yep. I was just paused. So anyway, before the doors are open on the shop, we're in the remodeling phase. I've got bikers doing the tile work on the floor. One of them's the husband of a stripper next door. And before they got the tile finished, we've got meth on the countertops and we're off to the races. Within a year, I was heavily selling methamphetamines. I was my shop wasn't even open. By a year and a half, that particular biker group had cleaned me out, stolen everything I had, and I was homeless. So that's where it went for me after 8 months of not using, how fast that I toppled back into just complete disaster and chaos. Now, again, I never thought I didn't even remember being in treatment. Like that's like, you hear people talk about, well, if once you go and you do this and you go to treatment, like it ruins your youth. That's not true for me. Like I had been to an AA meeting before. It didn't ruin nothing. Like I was off to the races, and I didn't even think I don't remember one time being, man, maybe I need to go to a meeting. I didn't think about that stuff.
Yeah. It's amazing how we can compartmentalize how our systems do that. And because here we are again, your system knew that you could feel good somehow. And that was the only truth that was the only truth I had, was cocaine, alcohol, drugs, and sex, to make myself feel better until the pain got enough that I was is death or another solution. And
So honestly, I didn't feel that death or another solution until I was 2 years sober. And I'm about to get to that because that's the most important part, I think, of my story. Is I went on this for another year and a half of basically bouncing around in hotel rooms, people's apartments, selling drugs, to support my habit, bouncing around with gang members and doing that kind of stuff. I was kidnapped 3 times. I was beaten at gunpoint twice. I've got, I still got a little dimple in the back of my head where the hammer of a revolver had stuck in my head, where a guy was hitting me over the back of the head with it. And, these
Breaking
things to
Bad
me are
episode,
like,
Camille.
they're great reminders. Like
Camille,
I'm bald. So
Camille, it's a breaking.
Yeah.
all the time.
It's a Breaking Bad episode, Camille. It's a Breaking Bad episode.
Look, honest to God, I've never watched a single episode of Breaking Bad because I was just like, this is probably too close to some of the things that I mean, of course, it's crazy in Breaking Bad. I know about the story, but some of the stuff like I don't really need to see it again. So, and that's the way I feel, I've anyway, I have, I had those experiences where I should have been dead multiple times. And every time God pulled me out of every one of those episodes. And I'm talking, these were not just Joe Blow drug dealers from, that were local. Like, these were rough. These guys had done bad things to people. And I should not have walked away from several of these events, but I did. And I had gotten so deep into this, and I had gotten so deep into this persona that every time I walked out of it, I would just puff my chest out and say, you can't see, I'm just that bad of a guy, and you can't, like, I would wear it as a badge. And I was, my wife's going to hate me for saying this. They called me Tattoo Scott, and I was notorious. And I don't know if you can relate, but you get in these circles of this environment, and like, your name is bigger than you are. And so I was getting something from that, right? My ego was being fed, and it was all bad stuff, but it was feeding a certain part of my spirituality that I had that absence of the affirmations that I didn't get when I was growing up. Right. So now I'm getting affirmations of people thinking I'm a badass and I'm a scary dude and all this stuff. And I'm loving that stuff, even through the chaos of getting beat up and all that stuff. So
Camille,
I finally get arrested, finally get dragged in by Williamson County. Yes, sir.
So Camille, you better be careful that they don't start calling you Pottery Camille.
I was just thinking, I mean, I feel like you get addicted to the lifestyle.
Yeah.
More than, the drug is just like something that goes along with it. But I was the same way. Like, I wanted that like chaos every single day of like having those people around me, and like being able to one that was like providing the drugs for them, and like just the whole lifestyle and like the chaos. Like, we're addicted to the game. Like all of that, like absolutely. Adrenaline.
I got addicted to the persona, and I thrived on being, everybody thought I was evil, and they called me the devil and all this stuff. And I just like lived on that stuff. Right.
Wow. And if you, anybody that knows Scott, that is so good to hear the full range of Scott Smith, because Scott is one of these guys that everybody just says like, wow, what a good man. This is what we have now. And it's amazing. So you had 2 years sober somewhere before you really got the spiritual thing. Huh? How did that? So what was the big crash and burn that got you in deeper?
Well, so the big crash and burn was, like I said, I never wanted to stop. Even the last time I was dragged to felony treatment. So again, I did not go to treatment voluntarily. I did not walk into a AA room or a 12-step room and say, I surrender, I want some help. I was required to go to meetings. I had 7 years of probation, felony probation. If I failed that, I was doing 10 years in prison. So while I was in treatment, I came to the realization that I didn't want to go back. Like, I was in treatment long enough that the reality started coming in. Like, man, I got my ass kicked a few times. Like, and I'm getting old enough that I don't think I want to go back out there and do that again. So I get in touch with the first half of the first step, of the 12 steps, right? I'm powerless over alcohol, drugs, in my case. I'm powerless over drugs. Stop doing drugs. You know, but that was as far as I got. And I really never bought that my life was unmanageable. I believe that my life was unmanageable because I used drugs. And if I would stop using drugs, I could get the manageability back. That's what I believed. So I get out of treatment. I'm required to go to sober living for 90 days. I'm required to do 90 meetings in 90 days, and then 3 meetings a week after that for infinitum. And so I commenced to doing that. And of course, my life starts to get better, right? I'm not using drugs and alcohol. I've got some consequence over my head, and I get a job, I get a girl, I get a car, I get some friends, and I go to meetings and I keep my head down. I stay towards the back. I go out and smoke cigarettes 3 or 4 times through the meeting, so I get through it. And then when it's over, I'm out, right? That's how I walked through, you know, basically my first year of sobriety outside of treatment. After the first year, I stayed in sober living for a year, and I decided with one of my roommates that we were ready to move on to a house of our own. We did that. My girlfriend at the time was, you know, over regularly, and, you know, started kind of the process of living there and things like that. And, you know, slowly but surely, I am creeping into this dissatisfaction with life. You know, I want what I want. I don't want to do what you want to do. We're doing it my way or the highway. She would tell you that I treated her like a roommate. Like, man, when it was time for bills to come up, I was on top of everybody in the house. You better give me your part of the money. Like, I lived like I was still selling drugs. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
I think you're pointing at the thing that maybe folks that are new or don't understand how the disease works are pointing at me. You're pointing at me is what you're pointing at. It's like when I was using and drinking and acting out, my character defects were just being fertilized. They were just on major display. But just because I'm not putting that stuff in my system doesn't mean that I don't have these whatever you want to call them, these adjusted character sections of myself, right? And they're going to come out if I don't continue the healing process.
Yeah, I think initially the good stuff that's happening in your life, it's kind of like when you first start dating someone, you put your best face forward, and, you know, it's kind of a mask of what your reality. And it's like you put your best forward to get your job, you put your best forward with your friends, you put your best forward with the new girlfriend and all that stuff. And I can only sustain that so long because my spirituality, you know, these trauma, you know, networks that you talk about, they haven't gone anywhere. And I've stopped treating them with the thing that was helping me all this time. So guess what?
Yeah.
They're going to resurface, and they did. And I basically separated myself from the fellowship, the group that was in the sober living, the guys, you know, most of the guys that I went to treatment with, we were all there involuntarily. So most of them are falling off anyway. So, and then my girlfriend's working a program, and she's like, no, thanks. Like, so she bails. And I end up basically, my roommate, he decides he's going back out, and he meets a girl that uses, so they could move in together. So I'm by myself. And, at first I was like, well, I'm by myself. I can do whatever I want, you know, and I'm just going to keep showing people how, you know, I can do this. And I kind of was that guy, like, I'm going to be the example of how I can do this. Right. I can make this. I'm going to show everybody that I'm going to rebuild my life and all that. And I just kept moving forward, started hanging out with a bunch of poker buddies, normal people that just did normal stuff. And sure enough, you know, one night these guys invite me out. They know that I go home every night because I go to work the next day, and they're like, hey, don't sit at home. Let's go. And let's go out. And so they invite me, and it's to the strip club. And, you know, I'm like, hey, sure, why not? You know, it sounds like a good idea. And I felt my body start getting prepared.
Yeah.
You know, anybody that has used, you know, and become addicted, you know what I'm talking about, when your body starts preparing itself for it biologically is already responding to the idea of the stimuli that it's coming, right? And so
yeah, for people that don't understand, it's kind of like when you smell a really good steak cooking, like in the next room over, and you know that you're about to eat it, and like your mouth is watering.
Yes.
Like I would get that feeling just from like a text message, like my body was like preparing me to go do something.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's kind of like, I think for normal people, like if you've ever fallen out of a tree or something like that, and, you know, it hurt, and then you almost fall later in life and your stomach kind of rolls, like that is, you're not falling, you've caught yourself, but your stomach rolled because it was preparing itself for what was coming next, right? That's what happens kind of with us. And I can tell you with certainty that doesn't happen when I have a beer. So my body knew that I wasn't going to have beers. My body knew that by the end of the night, we're in the place where we know where to get what we get, and we're doing this thing, right? So that shook me, and I believe that God kind of slapped me in the face and said, you know, what do you know, you better get scared. And I was very fearful in that moment that I was about to die. You know, honestly, like I came to this place where I literally lost the ability to be where I had been standing, which was on the fence.
I think we're at this place where because if you guys looked at, if you read Scott's blog that came out earlier the week of this podcast, this is an excerpt from it. My brain was setting me up to fail. I had convinced myself that if I just stayed away from drugs and alcohol, I would be fine. God sprinkled in a healthy dose of fear in that moment. And I remember standing in my living room scared to death because I knew that I could not sit on the fence that I've been sitting on anymore. From that moment, I felt my shoulders drop in relief. I craved, and there's several, that's part of the theme that Scott has talked about, that relaxing that happens in the body when we when we find a solution, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to be at meetings. I wanted to fellowship. I wanted to absorb recovery. It became my new dope. We have to believe we have nothing left, nothing to lose, and stay there to move forward. Are we at that place in the story?
Yeah. And so there was a second time that I felt my shoulders drop, and it was the very last time I got arrested, where I felt that relief that I didn't even know that I needed, that I was just like, I finally can rest. I finally, like, it's over. And, you know, here I am at the third place where this ever happened to me, is where I finally threw my arms up and said, God, I need help. Like, I cannot do this anymore. I am in a position of, you know, just complete fear and complete exhaustion over trying to live this life. And honestly, nothing bad had happened that day.
Yep.
But I knew in that moment, I was either going to prison or death, or I had to go do this, you know, work the steps. God was going to have to take over. I knew that. And so I chose to, you know, ask God for help. God instantly alerted me to an individual that I had managed to connect with somewhat through the rooms during the time where I was avoiding everybody. And, you know, I called that gentleman, and I was able to kind of let him know what was going on. And, you know, I was blubbering on the phone, and he told me he would come over the next day, and he told me to write everything down. And I did that, and I got through the night. I was able to make it to work the next day, and he showed up at my house the next afternoon, and he sat down and pieced together an inventory with me. And then we worked through a fourth and fifth step together. We didn't call it that, but now that I'm looking back, I recognize the column as he did it along with me. It was very sneaky. I think I needed somebody to do that sneakily with me, because I probably would have been like, I'm not doing that, you know, whatever. Like I'm that stubborn sometimes, but it was so wonderful that he gave me the biggest bear hug, and at the end, and he prayed with me, and he said, "You can call me your sponsor from now on." And I've been doing that ever since, and so grateful for my sponsor today.
For anybody new in recovery or wondering how do I work the steps, right? I've heard that I got to work the steps. Work the steps. You hear it all here's how you work the steps. Get a sponsor, do what you're told.
Yeah.
That's how you work the steps. That's the only way.
I'll add one thing to that. Here's how you work steps. Surrender. Like you are not, I could not get anywhere in the step work because I wasn't willing to admit that I was unmanageable. My life was unmanageable, and it had always been unmanageable. I just didn't recognize it.
Yeah, but
the moment that I recognized it, everything else opened itself up to me.
That's right. And that's kind of conceptual. I'm making a slightly different point here, Scott, which is just sort of casual for you. I mean, but I need to remind myself to work the steps is to take action. There's shit to do.
Yeah.
And if I just go to meetings and talk about the steps, that's one thing. But if I go to meetings, I have a sponsor who gives me assignments on a regular basis. That's what working the steps is from my perspective. And this is a little bit of a misnomer. I think a lot of folks think as long as you refer to the steps, you're working the steps.
Yeah. And I would say this, if you think that you can, I don't have a big book in reach, but if you think that you can pick up a big book and go sit in a room by yourself and work the steps by yourself, you're kidding yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Actually, my brain will rationalize so much information that I will not be able to get through it. I have to have somebody to guide me through this with some experience and some strength and some hope.
That's right. And actually sitting and reading the big book for me would have been, it's actually, we recommend it. Go ahead, read it. Please read it. But yeah, if I really want to transform my life, I got to get somebody like Scott who will say, hey, Bob, do some writing, meet with me, and we'll talk about it. And then you'll tell me some of your experience, strength, and hope, not just what you do. That's what somebody that's been in the program a long time will do. As opposed, we all think that they're going to tell us how to live our life. I've never been told that by any of the folks, but I have heard a lot of experience that has transformed me.
Yeah, and honestly, if you're willing to pick up the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and just read it with the intent of seeing if it applies to you, it's going to explain all that to me, right? It explains all that to me pretty clearly if I'm open to the information that it has in there. It's not going to lead me astray and tell me to go sit in a room by myself and do this like it talks about. Like we have people that have gone on before us. That honestly, if I didn't have somebody that had those experience, strength, and hope, I wouldn't buy this stuff. I was in here about like this was some kind of work program, and I was going to be washing somebody's car for them, and they were going to be giving me crazy assignments, and I was going to have no social life. Like I built it up because I really didn't want to do it, right? Because I believed that I could do for myself.
Yeah.
When I finally.
So often none of us want to do it, right? I mean, it's like, I don't always want to do this stuff. I have to keep myself just around the people that are doing it, and then somehow my motor gets rolling again. Well,
I mean, true, but the cool part is, like, for me, and what happened, and that little part where you read where I started craving this stuff, when I finally dropped my shoulders and surrendered and started moving, like, I wanted more of it because my perception was changing of how the world operated. Like, every single day that I went in with the intent of, I want more of that, I got more.
Yeah.
Right. And it's amazing once you are willing to do this stuff of what you can accomplish. And, God has done for me what I couldn't do for myself. I have an amazing family today. I have an amazing wife today. My wife is the girlfriend that left me from before. God found it to bring us back together down that path. And
so Scott has the kind of woman that puts things on his wall behind him. Like, turn your camera up a little bit. Yeah, just in case you forget. Although it is pointing away from you, you can't really see it. It's all for us, I guess. You don't need that message, apparently.
Well, I see it every day when I walk into this room. So and there's a lot of that around our house. Our house is filled with recovery. It's filled with God.
Yeah.
You know, my life is filled with a bunch of amazing and exciting things. I get to do all those things that all the things that I kind of wanted out of life, but just didn't know how to achieve, became either irrelevant because they weren't good for me, or they became possible through me being willing to work through this. Because like the steps are not some, you know, Joe Blow came up with. These are spiritual steps and spiritual principles that are based on the basic tenets of every spiritual program since the beginning of man. Like, it's basically, how do I be a good person and learn to love myself?
Yeah.
And, you know, through the steps, I learned all the falsities that I told myself, that somehow I was unlovable. I started to understand that, you know, the pieces that had, through doing the inventory.
Inventory, by the way, for those of you that don't know what Scott means by that, there's in the fourth step, that's the place where we take, just like a person who owns a store takes inventory of what is in the store, we take inventory of our personalities. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a regular
thing
to do in recovery.
And you know, the things that I thought were valuable to me are no longer, a lot of those are no longer valuable, and I have to clean them out of me, you know. And for example, when I was out there being me before I got clean, you know, manipulation and rage and intimidation and dishonesty, like, I used a lot of those effectively to get what I wanted, to make sure that I was okay.
Yeah.
You know, I have to clean that stuff up, and I have to take a look at it and see where it's no longer useful to me. So by putting these things on paper.
Yeah, that's part of the step work, but it's also part of the ongoing 10th step, right? In taking inventory on a regular basis. But I just want to make sure folks that are listening don't think that it's this ongoing hammering at ourselves and hating ourselves and not liking ourselves. And we call it character defects and all that. It's really, you know, the language is just sort of poetic. It's a lot of it came from the 30s, and it's like, also Bill was a little bit of he was a pretty good writer. He didn't want to call it the same thing over and over, shortcomings, defects. So if we don't get hung up on the language, it's really an invitation to let go of our trauma. That's what's happening in 12-step recovery. And please, anybody that's listening, look at this guy. You could be like Scott Smith. And actually, we do have to transition here, Scott. We're kind of there at the place where, and I know you would never say it, but Scott is working a good program personally. He continues to do it. He's sober and really has not risen above all of this. He and I see each other in circles on a regular basis, and but I also know that you have done this tricky job of making sure that you have expanded this so that people that are ready for this have a doorway in that has a container. That's that is you know, you have several their businesses that have income and mixing money and inviting people. But the main concept, just like us at Deep Waters, is we're really a referral source, trying to get people launched into a life of 12-step recovery, you know, and because therapists aren't going to be there forever. No, you know, or the rehab is not going to be there forever. The main thing is to launch people into this community lifestyle of connection and helping others, right? That's the juice. So
That's right.
if you could transition, Scott, to maybe putting a tag on this, and also letting folks know how they can reach you and the different entities that that they have access to.
Okay. Yeah, just real quickly, I mean, just to kind of come to a close, the steps are vital for me to see who I am, to be able to see who I can be, and to become what I want to be. And it's all about being able to exist in a healthy relationship with, God, and with my fellow human, and ultimately a romantic partner, and hopefully, children and offspring. So like, I have to surrender myself to this idea that I am no longer in control of my own life, that I'm insane around the idea of drugs and alcohol and me as an individual, and that there's help out there, and that I'm willing to accept it, that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get better, which means I'm going to follow the directions, which means I do the inventory, which means I learn about myself, which means I uncover all of the dishonesty that I've been telling myself, so I can unravel this all the way back to that original trauma, to say, oh, that thing has caused me to believe this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and see where I have affected others, so that I can move forward and reconnect with my higher power and commit myself to him again with all this new information, so that I can move forward and then start to right the wrongs that I had a part in. As I do that, I start to be able to look people in the eye again, and I start to behave like a human being, and I start to create new relationships where people actually I interact with, I have healthy boundaries, that I'm there to be helpful to them, and they're there to be helpful to me, and we work together to have a relationship. That's what a relationship is. I do these 10, what Bob said, the 10th step. I do 10 and 11, which are my nightly inventories and my morning meditation, so that every day I can work on being a better version of me, so that I can continue to gain the promises that my higher power has told me, and it's in the big book if you want to explore that. But I basically get to live life, and I get to walk through things without burning the house down every time I don't get my way or I don't feel good. That was impossible for me before. And if I'm willing to go out and help another alcoholic, which is what I try to do, not in my professional life, but in my personal life. Like, my professional life has nothing to do with what the 12th step of Alcoholics Anonymous is, right? That I do that. I have a business. If I try to trade that business for my recovery, my personal recovery, I'm doomed. I almost said it, but like I have to keep those separate. And my pact with my higher power and my sponsor is that I will go out and sponsor, and I do that. And I have to do that in order to keep this. And I'm never going to be cured to this.
Okay, Scott. Okay, Scott. Can you hear me? Your Wi-Fi has gone completely out.
I promise you, with something.
Hey, brother, can you hear me? Scott? Scott, can you hear me? Your Wi-Fi has gone completely wacko. Scott?
I can hear you.
Okay, your Wi-Fi.
You got me.
Your Wi-Fi has gone completely wacko. So we're gonna make this transition here. Hopefully it'll come back in a second, and you can give some contact information as we sort of wait for your Wi-Fi to come back. Camille, will you give?
How's it now?
It's better.
Oh, there it is.
So
okay.
Yes, your professional.
Let me just give you some contact info.
Yeah, but I don't think I think it's all very delayed right now. So we're going to make a transition. If you are able to hear me, Scott, I would like you to, yes, your professional life is separate from your recovery. I know that. I've heard you speak about that over and over. It's important for all of us helping professionals to do our own work. And if our work happens to be helping other alcoholics, or if our business life happens, it's a separate thing. I don't get to lean on that. However, I do get to tell people how to find me. And yes, I'm going to ask you to do that now.
Okay. So if you want to learn more about what we do, you can go to extramilerecovery.com, which is our residential licensed facility for men outside of Tupelo, Mississippi. Our extended care is theascensionhouse.com, which is a non-clinical 12-step life skill environment. We have one house for men and one house for women, which is a short-term 30 to 60-day program. And then brightsidesoberliving.com, which is our sober living homes. We have 4 men's homes and 3 women's homes. Been operating for almost 11 years now. You can reach me at smith@extramilerecovery.com is the easiest way to reach me. Or you can call me. My phone number is 901-626-4454. And I'm happy to talk to you more.
Nice. And Camille, the short version of what's up here at Deep Waters?
Yes, short version. Thanks, Scott, for your story. That was really inspiring for everybody. I really enjoyed it. But for Deep Waters, you can find us at deepwatersrecovery.com. Keep an eye out for our DWI, the Deep Waters Intensive, which will be in September of this year, 2021. And then our upcoming experiential facilitators training is going to be on June 4th and 5th. You can email us at admin@deepwatersrecovery.com and on all of our social media channels under Deep Waters Recovery.
Yep, that's what's happening. And yes, the experiential facilitators trainings is also connected to the certification if you want to learn how to do dynamic groups. And also, we're moving this into treatment centers. So that's call us, email us, and we'll have a larger conversation about all this. Just to close, I'm going to ask a quick question, spontaneous. You don't get to rehearse it, Scott. It's like, here we go. You ready? Everybody take a breath. All 3 of us are going to answer this. What do people misread about you? You first, Camille.
I think people misread that I'm really nice and sweet and that I don't ever have any explosions. But yeah.
All right, Scott.
I honestly, I think people misread that I'm angry all the time. I don't know if I've just got a resting bitch face or what, but I think that people tend to think that I'm maybe unapproachable sometimes, but I love interacting, and as y'all can tell, I can talk about recovery all day. Yeah. So please don't hesitate.
I think people misread that I'm just a big wild mess and that I don't know about this, but I think that they think that I'm just not. But I'll tell you what, inside my mind, I have it all lined up, baby.
I bet you do.
So let's leave it there. That was kind of a fun little way to close. Just so everybody knows, Scott will be back next week. We're doing a short episode on Tradition 4 about each group should be autonomous, but not so autonomous that it affects the group. It's a good concept for any organization or family or all of the concepts in 12-step recovery transfer beautifully to living well as human beings together. So come back for that one. Scott, thanks so much for being here. Camille,
thank you.
This was a good dance today, and thanks for everyone.
Enjoyed it.
Yes, and thanks for everyone being here at the Recovery Crew. You're in the deep waters now.